Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello there. It's time for a review. But first, let me address the elephant in the room. I haven't been posting regularly or really at all, actually. And that's because I've been sick. Really sick for a number of months. I got a really bad upper respiratory thing that I just couldn't shake, and I was coughing to the point to where talking was really impossible. Like, I could only really do it in short spurts, and otherwise, if I did that for too long, I'd lose my voice entirely. And, since I live in America, and healthcare here is a joke if you are a poor, I pretty much had to stick it out until it resolved itself, which it has. And now I'm back with a new spin on the video essays I have been doing. See, I have this problem. I have a subscription to a certain horror movie service, and I love horror movies. On said service, there's a feature where I can save all the movies that I'm planning on watching, and like most of us, I have less time in my day than I do in order to watch all of those horror movies. So yeah, what that means is that I have in my little My List queue around 75 movies that I have yet to see. And while I was recuperating, I had this thought that I could watch these movies and review them here on my channel. Okay, so mind you, these movies kind of stretch the gamut in terms of genre, and a lot of them are in the very least a few years old and in the very most older than I am. So, I thought it might be fun to share some of my thoughts about these movies and share some fun facts about them along the way. Assuming there are any fun facts to be shared. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it with The Boy Behind the Door. So this movie premiered in 2021. It was directed by David Carboneer and Justin Powell and stars Lonnie Davis and Ezra Dewey. It also stars another familiar face, especially if you like horror like I like horror. But we'll get to that during this whole thing. Now, before we get started, I feel that I should give you a little teeny tiny disclaimer that I want to share. This isn't a trigger warning, but I feel obliged to make it clear, in case I've never made it clear before. So if you are somehow part of the Red Hat cult here in the States, and you know who I'm talking about, and somehow you are following me, I would strongly advise that you not. And this is not something I normally mention in my videos, as I assume if you've been watching me at all this time, then you probably have realized that I am not a bigot, even though I've not explicitly said that I'm not, in fact, a bigot. But for the sake of this movie in particular, I'm saying it right now, because we are going to touch on things that might rub you the wrong way if you are a member of the Red Hat cult. And since I don't argue with people on the internet, I'm not trying to waste your time or mine. So there, you've been warned. Thank you. Alright, so now that that's out of the way, let's get started. This movie starts with two boys, Kevin and Bobby. Kevin and Bobby are around, say, 10 or 11 years old, and they're best buds. Now, Kevin and Bobby are walking through the woods on their way home from what appears to be a Little League game, judging from the uniforms. Why are they walking through the woods? Clearly, they live in the country. They're walking by some woods, but they're clearly not city kids. So, in this way, the movie starts pretty light. They're just two boys walking home, talking about one day leaving this one-horse town, going off and making their fortune. But then, Kevin gets kidnapped. And when Bobby goes to look for him, he gets snatched up too. Okay, so both boys are knocked out, and they're put in the trunk of a car, where they're both driven to an old farmhouse. Now, Kevin gets taken out of the trunk first and dragged away, leaving Bobby all alone. But fortunately for Bobby, he's a resourceful young lad and manages to free himself from the trunk and is able to run off. Now, it's about here that we have our sliding doors moment in this movie, and that we could theoretically go on a whole different path right here. Free from the trunk, Bobby manages to get out of the house and he is booking it away from the house, as you would do. And here you could say that Bobby, the smart thing to do would be for Bobby to run away, find help, bring back the police, whatever. And who knows how that home thing might go. I mean, I could personally, off the top of my head, do a pretty good horror movie just by that alone. But like I said, this is a sliding doors moment, so that is not the path that Bobby chooses. So he gets out of the house, and he's running away, and he hears his very best friend in the whole wide world screaming for his life. And Bobby, who is 10 or 11 years old and better than most of us, can't bring himself to leave him. So he breaks back into the house. Personally, I think this kid has more balls than I do, because I've seen way too many horror movies to go back into a creepy old farmhouse for any reason. But that's just me. Okay, so Bobby is back in the house. Unfortunately for him, his stealth stats are very, very, very high. And he manages to move around the dark without being noticed by their kidnapper, who's, as it happens, just chilling and watching an old movie in the living room. I don't remember what old movie it was. It was an old black and white movie. Our kidnapper likes old black and white horror movies, actually. Anyway, so in all the sneaking around, Bobby manages to find an air vent, which happens to lead to the attic where Kevin is hiding, or being held, rather. Through that vent, he's able to speak to Kevin, and what he finds out is that his best friend is chained up somewhere in the dark. They talk to the vent, trying to figure out a plan, and before they can come up with one, somebody rolls up to the house. Now, with this new visitor coming, Bobby realizes he needs to hide, and hide fast. Okay, so Bobby goes to hide. And while he does that, he hears the kidnapper let this guy in, and through the darkness, he manages to either see, I think he sees some money exchanged. It's been a minute since I watched this movie, please forgive me, I'm going by memory here. But he sees some money exchanged, and he also sees the kidnapper give the guy a watch, which incidentally is set for about an hour. Pay attention to that, that is important. And with that done, the kidnapper dips out. Just leaves, just get in a car and just drives away, leaving this stranger in the house with both boys. Now, the next thing Bobby hears is this guy go into the room that his best friend is in. And then he hears Kevin start screaming again. That's right, you guessed it. Our kidnapper is actually some sort of weird pedo pimp. Also, in this part, I think we do see a flash of the stranger's car, which has some bumper stickers on it. And also some alt-right stuff playing on the radio, but moving on. Now, with Kevin screaming and everything, I don't think he gets very far, because Bobby, while he's hiding, accidentally drops a paperweight on the floor, which makes a really big bang, and it signals to the creep that he's not, in fact, alone in the house with Kevin. Okay, so stranger creep goes looking for Bobby, but it takes him a minute to find him because, as I said earlier, Bobby has a very, very, very high stealth stat. Unfortunately, he does find him. He has him chasing around the house, and they end up in the kitchen. And when they're in the kitchen, Bobby does the only thing that you're supposed to do if there's somebody trying to hurt you and you're in a kitchen. He grabs a really, really big knife. And there's this whole thing where the stranger creep is like trying to negotiate this kid with the knife and everything, and he goes and attacks him, and well, Bobby ends up actually accidentally stabbing and killing the guy. Which, yeah, nobody's gonna shed a tear for him. So, okay, stranger creep is dead. Bobby gets cracking on finding a way out for both him and his friend. So he rifles through the creep's pockets looking for a key to the door to the attic where Kevin is, but doesn't find anything. And so he starts searching the house for anything at all that can help him. And what he finds is probably my favorite moment in this entire movie. He finds a box full of old stuff, and in said box, he finds a phone. That's good, right? So, okay, so I want to pause for a second to appreciate the lack of basic historical technical knowledge of the younger generation. You see, because the phone that Bobby finds is a rotary phone. For those of you out there who are part of Generation A or Z, let me save you the Google trip and explain to you what that actually is. Okay, so a rotary phone is one of the earliest types of telephones that still exists today. It existed in like everybody's home around maybe the 20s or 30s, all the way up until the 2000s. Yeah, they're even around when cell phones became a thing. Now, these phones would be connected to a landline. And what that is, basically, you plug it into a wall to get it to work. Kind of like how you would plug in your modem, for example. It's the same kind of thing. But yeah, everybody had a rotary phone. But I, as a Generation Xer, did have a rotary phone in my house for most of my childhood up until I was a teenager, and we got a push-button phone and then a cordless phone. Yeah, eventually, as technology does, the phones are phased out of just about every American household. And that said, should you happen to see one in the wild, I promise you, it will more than likely be at your great-grandma's house. I would say your grandma's house, but I'm a grandma and I ain't got one, so... Yeah, so like nobody has them anymore, and the only generations left that could competently use one without instruction are my generation and the boomers. Probably some millennials too who grew up in like poor to middle class houses, but for the most part, my generation and the boomers are the experts in the rotary phones. So Bobby finds his phone, and to his credit, identifies it as such. But being that he's a Gen X to Gen A kid, he has absolutely no idea what kind of phone this is or how it works. Fortunately for him, Kevin does know what type of phone it is. Kevin has a grandma that still has one. So he's basically able to tell him how it works. Personally, this is the type of detail that I really like in this film because it reminded me that if I were in his shoes, I personally would have been relieved, as I'm old and well acquainted with antiquated tech. But this sequence adds a layer of fear that most of us would never consider in reminding us that this is a child in an impossible situation. Okay, so Bobby figures out how to use the phone and calls 911. He calls and we think, okay, help is coming. Yeah, except you guys forgot that the watch that the stranger creep had on was only set for an hour. And all this looking around the house and finding the phone and figuring out how to use it has used that time up. All right, so Bobby's time has run out. And just as he's telling the 911 operator everything they could possibly need to know, the headlights from the kidnapper's car flashes through the windows. He's got to hang up, and he's got to do it before he can tell police anything at all. Now, in this situation, Bobby could, of course, run and hide, but there's another hitch. And the problem, there's a whole dead body in the kitchen that he's got to get rid of. I mean, and have to get rid of it, but it's smart if he does. So using more brain smarts than I currently have at 51 years old, Bobby manages to hide the body and clean up the mess without alerting the kidnapper, while the kidnapper checks on Kevin and goes to take a shower. Now, the place that Bobby has chosen to hide, unfortunately, is in the kidnapper's bedroom under the bed. Which is how he knows the kidnapper has gone to take a shower. So here's where Bobby gets a little daring. When the kidnapper comes into the bedroom, he witnesses the kidnapper open a safe and then go take the shower. When he comes out, he sees the number that the kidnapper puts into the safe and decides to break into it. What he finds is a lot of money, as you would imagine a pedo pimp would have, some more keys, and a lockbox. Now, instead of leaving the lockbox alone, which most of us would probably do, he pries it open. And when he pries it open, he finds a bunch of Polaroids of naked little boys, including some of his bestie. Yeah, this kidnapper is a real monster. But hold on to your knickers, folks. It gets better. So Bobby gets the keys from the safe and then tries them on the attic door, or at least tries to, but he doesn't really get a chance to because kidnappers done with their shower and they are coming down the hall. Bobby goes and hides, high stealth, but much like D&D, he rolls a nat 1. For those of you that are not aware of what D&D lingo is, basically what that means is that the blood from his cut hand ends up on a wall, and the kidnapper sees it. And now the kidnapper knows that Bobby is in the house. So Bobby realizes that the kidnapper knows he's there, and he runs away and he hides in the bathroom and he locks himself in. Unfortunately for him, the kidnapper has an axe. And yeah, just like in The Shining, yeah, it's looking pretty bleak for Bobby at this point with an axe-wielding maniac on the other side of the door. But kidnapper doesn't get through because, ding dong, somebody is at the front door again. So the kidnapper goes downstairs, turns out the volume on the television, and answers the door. And here is where we get two surprises at once. Surprise number one, the police were actually managed to trace the call, and there is a uniform at the door. Yay, Bobby! But then, I did say there were two surprises, didn't I? From this point on is a major spoiler. If you've been enjoying this so far and you don't want to hear about the major spoiler, stop the video here. Go watch the movie and come back. I'm not going anywhere. So it should be noted that up until this point, we do not see or hear the kidnapper. Everything in the house is very dark. Most of the lights are out. We see like hands and feet, but we don't actually see who the kidnapper is. Well, when the door opens and we see the kidnapper for the very first time in this entire movie, gagged. And listen, I am about as progressive as the next girl, but I'll tell you something. Anytime I run into a movie that manages to check me on my patriarchal brainwashing, skill. That is skill right there. You see, that's exactly what I like about this reveal. See, as a society, we are conditioned to see the cruel and monstrous person in this type of movie to be a man, because in life and in horror, it usually is. But, you know, this is just a reminder that while the chances of being kidnapped and sold into sex slavery and possibly murdered by a woman are very, 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 very low, it's never zero. And on top of that, this movie uses the audience's assumption to its advantage in the plot. See, the cop doesn't even suspect anything could possibly wrong the moment he sees her. And actually, he's kind of polite to her. He asks her name, she gives it, it's a very nice, pleasant conversation. And things don't really start to turn until he thinks to ask her for ID. And she very politely says, "No problem. I'll go get it for you, officer." And she does. And then she doesn't come back. So he comes into the house. Y'all remember that scene in The Shining when the cavalry finally comes and gets an axe in the back for his trouble? That's basically what happens. Poor Bobby witnesses the whole thing, thinking that his savior is there only to see him with an axe in his chest, and now the kidnapper has a gun. So the kidnapper manages to chase Bobby into the basement. And that's where we get a little bit of lore. So throughout this movie, the filmmakers take a few digs here and there at a certain political party and their alleged taste for pedophilia. The kidnapper pretty much confirms this by monologuing about it and how much money she's made doing this. She also mentions that her clients, her friends, tend to pay for pretty little white boys and not black boys. And she was just kind of hoping that he'd suffocate in the trunk. But while the villain is monologuing, Bobby gets the jump on her, knocks her over the head, I think with a bat. Or something hard. But not before she manages to shoot him in the leg, which is bad news. Still, he manages to use the handcuffs from the dead cop to handcuff her to the pipe and limp away to free Kevin. So yeah, once again, this is a part of the movie where we could end the story, but that's not any fun, is it? So he manages to get Kevin out of the attic. And they only get about as far as the stairs before they discover that Kevin is wearing a shock collar. He gets a certain distance away and he's shocked all the hell. So Bobby's like, okay, no problem. I'm going to get some pruning shears, get this thing off of you, and we're gone. He goes to the basement to find the pruning shears. Kidnapper attacks him, sticks a finger in the wound, definitely an infection. But Bobby, who has found the shears, cuts off her finger, which incidentally also is a good way to get an infection. Unfortunately, all that bleeding and running and drama takes a toll on Bobby, and he ends up passing out before he can get back to his bestie. But Kevin doesn't give up. He forces himself down the stairs, shot collar and all, gets a hold of the pruning shears, gets it off, and then he tries to get Bobby up so that they can run away. After some back and forth, he convinces Bobby to get into the dead cop's police car. They manage to call for help, find a first aid kit, and everything seems like it's going to be alright. But no. No. See, the kidnapper gets herself free and gets to them. She pulls Bobby out of the car. She tries to kill Bobby. Kevin gets her with a shock collar and shocks the crap out of her. I mean, you love to see it, right? So now we're at the end of the movie, and this is where we kind of dip a little bit into cliche territory, because she manages to chase them down with an axe, and just as she's about to chop them up into little itty bitty pieces, the cops show up and shoot her. And they all live happily ever after. I mean, you know, the boys get to go to the beach, which they were talking about doing before all this happened, and I assume it's in California, and yeah, barring some therapy, physical therapy and mental therapy, a lot of, like, a hospital trip for Bobby at least, yeah, happy ending for all. And you know what? Honestly, this is the kind of movie that deserves a happy ending. Like, I'm very much an Oscar Wilde kind of girl in the sense that I'm all about killing your darlings, but if Bobby or Kevin bit the dust at any point in this movie, I'd be flipping tables. But yeah, this movie really exceeded my expectations in more ways than just a few, and I think that it successfully raised the bar in terms of survival horror in some ways that no one ever expects, because we all have certain assumptions about things in our society. And I love a movie that sees things in shades of gray, and thinks outside the box, whatever cliche you want to throw in there. Yeah. A++, 10s across the board. We'll recommend to others. So that is it for this week's video essay. Thank you so much for listening to me rant for a little bit. I post every 2 weeks, barring anything crazy going on. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you'll be the first to see my next post. With that said, see you next time. Bye.